about my book. I actually did put my house into it for the purpose of actually seeing quietly whether anybody did the walks, because they didn't know where my house was, and it was top of a very steep hill. And very soon after the book was launched, it did sell very well, and we did lose money, and there's a totally different story on that. But people did come up the hill, people did do the walks, and it was one of those sort of gratifying things that you actually do in trying to explore the opportunities in your city. The other thing about the book was, if you look at the book now and look at this city now, it's a totally different city. The book is 15 years old, but this Brisbane that I came to 35 years ago is an entirely different city. And yet the core values of this city remain, I think, the essence of why this is a city with a tremendously good future. This image is really an image about, let's step back a bit, about what great cities have in them. It's an image of Piazza San Pietro. Many of you would have been there in Rome, the Dome of St. Peter's in the background. Great cities have many common attributes. They have great locations, they have great natural assets, and they have great urban interventions. We can have the next one. This is an image I like to use in relation to Brisbane and my favourite city in the world, Rome. Both river cities, a couple of similar bends in the river. On the left, Roma, on the right, Roma Street in Brisbane. You can see the Piazza San Pietro in the centre of the slide on the right, on the left. The image I just shown you, that beautiful drawing by Piranesi. And on the right-hand side, you can see the Roma Street Parkland, the Brisbane Transit Centre. I made the observation in a separate setting that Piazza San Pietro is designed by Michelangelo and Bernini, and the Brisbane Transit Centre wasn't. The opportunity, though, sits there, and you can see a fantastic space there, which we know, and we're going to hear a little bit about next from Graham Newton. So here we have a couple of the great Italian artists of the era. There is Piranesi on the left, who drew these fantastic illustrations of Rome based on the ruins, and he really projected what Rome might have been like in the thousands of years before. And at the same time, there was another Roman cartographer, artist, surveyor by the name of Nolli, who produced these remarkable footprints of the city. If you look on the left, there's a Nolli plan of Rome. It's got every piece of public space in that city, every street, and if you go inside each of the buildings, if there's a public area in it, a courtyard, a church, a colonnade, you can see inside that public space. Many of you, I'm sure, have roamed around medieval Rome. It's a fantastically interesting city to get lost in and have fun in and emerge eventually. And on the right-hand side is a figure ground drawing of Brisbane. Now, the drawing on the left took Nolli, I imagine, quite some time to produce. The drawing on the right, we managed to produce from our GIS system by interrogating it and dropping out a few layers. That was produced overnight with the technology that we now have available. So if you put the old walled Rome down in the setting of the Greater Rome, if you put a 5-kilometre radius around it, and you compare that to Brisbane, you can see that ancient Rome fits well inside a 5-kilometre zone of Brisbane. So, and that 5-kilometre zone managed to run quite a lot of the world for quite a long time. So this 5-kilometre zone we have in our city has a lot more potential than we've really seen. And it's a very interesting thing to step back from and think about. We know that there are, in broad terms, 250,000 people who live in this zone, and the projections are over the next 20 years that'll go up by 50%. We also know that there's 390,000 jobs in this zone, and that won't go up by 50%. This is music to Ross Elliott's ears. It will go up by only 30%, which means presumably if we're creating more jobs, they're not going to be in this inner 5K zone. So connectivity in and around the city, a public transport issue, is one of the great issues challenging this city. And there are two big areas of public policy that do have large budgets in them, and I think you've really got to look at areas of public policy with budgets to think how you might be going to reimagine your city. Public transport is one, and the other one, I think, is public health. This is a very interesting map we found from the University of Queensland, who fly these heat maps now in quite considerable detail. This is a very, a big snapshot version of it, but it gets right down to individual backyards and the heat level of the city. You can see, of course, the river is a big air conditioning system running right through the middle of the city. You've got the Mount Cootha, Brisbane Forest Park on the left, a bigger, cooler place. But if you interrogate and look a little further, you see the older suburbs of this city are considerably cooler than the inner suburbs. And there is a very interesting public health opportunity, I think, that comes from this kind of data analysis. The Lancet magazine, many of you would be aware of, is one of the leading scientific journals, peer-reviewed reference papers about scientific, factual-based observations. Their issue of this September last year was 100% devoted to urban design, to papers that prove that better designed cities that create more active lifestyles produce healthier people. It may seem pretty obvious, but in fact, as a peer-reviewed thing, that this is saying well-designed cities are good for your health. So let's go back and just think about what kind of city we have here and how this city has emerged. First of all, we take some quotes from David Malouf, who is one of Brisbane's great observers, who grew up here in the era when the city was a much quieter place, who identifies how important the role of the river is, not just as a river, but as a place-making mechanism for that infused lifestyle that is unique to this city. And he then makes the observation that Brisbane is also not a flat city, it's a hilly city, it's a river valley. And it's all gullies and sudden vistas, as he's put it. And then if we look a little further into that, you start to see the structure of peninsulas and villages in the darker patches you can see inside the inner 5K zone. So the river and the pattern of development has established this interesting mosaic around the river structure. When you then put on top of that the original tram network diagram, which I think this is a lovely diagram, really enjoy seeing this. You can understand the way this city was fundamentally structured. It's structured around the tram routes, largely along the ridges. It's structured around a limited number of river crossings. Not many bridges were built in this city. And so the pattern of development is strongly informed by decisions that were made over 100 years ago. And we know that we have a city that has tremendous economic opportunity. We know its river is a vital component to the kind of image making and amenity the city offers. We do have world-class education facilities in this city. We do have highly distinctive local character. We've got a brilliant network of inner city villages, and we have an unparalleled lifestyle. We tell ourselves that, we know that. But we're also talking about, and we've just heard a little bit about it in the previous session, we're entering an era of considerable disruption and considerable economic challenge and competition. And as Ed Glazer says in this quote, not every city is going to succeed. And there is no reason for Brisbane necessarily to proceed, even though we've got many, many assets. There's a lot more challenge at the doorstep to ensure that we are going to be able to deliver on the prospects that we have. Little piece of work that Kate Merrick's office has done for us, benchmarking Brisbane. We know we talk about this wonderful livable city that we've got, but we never make the top 20 of livable cities on whatever lists, and there's many, many measures, of course, some of them perhaps not very real, but Melbourne and Auckland constantly come in the top few. of these lists, no matter what the criteria are. So even though we know we have a great lifestyle here, we need to benchmark it, we need to understand what things can change, we need to understand our competitive and economic advantage. Now this particular slide, if you don't remember anything else I talk about today, I'd like you to perhaps remember this one. The four Australian cities, and there are more than four obviously, but that's all I could fit on one page. If you look at the fundamental structure of these cities, if you look at Sydney, the inner 5K, dominated by the magnificent harbour, large CBD, North Sydney, a city with enormous amenity built around that structure, and a city very difficult to change that structure, and to just off the page is the ocean. So basically fixed high amenity location. If you look at Melbourne, the river is relatively minor impact, a big strong grid in Melbourne, developing, as we've heard this morning, with a lot of energy. Very difficult to change Melbourne, but there's more of it that can fit into that space. You look at Adelaide, very large CBD, plenty of room, high amenity, really good CBD, but another couple of 100,000 people in there probably, and it would absorb it relatively easily. A strong, simple urban structure, nothing that you can necessarily radically change. But you look at Brisbane, you've got the river running right through the centre of it, very few crossings of that river, amenity at either end with the Mount Cootha, Brisbane Forest Park and Moreton Bay bookending a city that's set back from the coast, and a structure that is possible to change. You can change it by crossing it a bit more often. When you start to bring these things together, you realise it's not just a circle, it's not just a 5K circle that reflects the real underlying pattern of this city. It's actually a shape more like this. It follows the axis of the river, and it contains within it what we in my office have been studying and calling three embedded cities: a knowledge city, a river city, and a mosaic city. The knowledge city is one that is not new. It was identified 10 years ago. Michael Rayner did an excellent piece of work with the Smart Cities Council in identifying this north-south axis of high-quality institutions. We know that we've got now the development of new hubs that are really encouraging a lot more focus within this structure. We're pushing high-quality new construction in our urban environments and our academic environments. And recently, you'd be aware the government's announced 2 new inner-city will likely be high-rise schools, $400 million investment. No new schools have been built in Brisbane of any kind since 1962. That's a real measure of reinforcing this axis. Then the river city itself, we talk about it a lot, but in reality the river is a very contested space. It is not easy to deal with doing things on the river because there are multiple interested parties, from local government right through to many government agencies. There's a great opportunity along this axis to do a better job and to embed much longer term amenity and connectivity into the city. And we have the kind of environments and the ability for the resilience argument also to play an important role in how this city positions itself for the long term. And thirdly, we have this, what we're calling a mosaic city, a sticky city, the idea of these places of excellence embedded within this zone that offer a high quality to live in, they offer a high quality lifestyle, they offer much more affordable access than certainly Sydney and Melbourne offer. And I have seen these emerge really from secret little villages to the fantastic network now of villages that we have around the city over the last 35 years. So what if we built 10 new bridges? What if we built 10 new bridges in the next 10 years? Frightened off the front row. There was a commission for Brisbane in 1925 which identified a dozen places to cross the river. And nearly 100 years later, we've managed to build about 6 of them. If you have a look at that map, you can see some very logical locations that you could cross the river and start to connect up the city in a way that it simply has never met its potential. We did a little bit of analysis of world-based river cities, and we counted up in the inner 5Ks how many bridges the cities you can see on the screen there have got. As you can see, Brisbane comes a very long way last. And it's not only last in terms of the number of bridges, the Brisbane River has the most river frontage within a 5K zone of any of those cities. So in fact, it's doubly troubling that we just have not made the investment to connect the city in a way that would have dramatically changed the sort of city we now have, but it is the opportunity that we have to change it. We go back to the original observation I made about Rome. In Old Rome, there are 36 bridges inside that zone. I think that was 26. So, what are the numbers? The provocation I'm putting up here is that we should build 10 bridges, that they are pedestrian cycle bridges, they're not vehicular bridges. Let's start with the crossing, or the ability to make the crossing. Let's do 10 for $1 billion, and let's do them all in 2 years. That is quite possible. We know that we've built a number of very successful river crossings over the last 10 years. We've actually got a little bit going. People would know the Goodwill Bridge gets 3 million visits or crossings a year now. There was a push originally that the Goodwill Bridge was unnecessary. Well, I think the 3 million crossings a year have strongly disproved that. So the idea of bringing this back and changing the city, I think, is a very strong idea when we underpin what is likely to happen. If you look at the photograph on the right, that is what I consider to be the iPhone of public and personal transport. These are available now. I went and rode this one. Economic Development Queensland have got a couple of them that you can have a look at out at North Shore Hamilton. These are $2,000. They are made from aircraft-grade aluminium. They go up to 25 k's an hour. You've got 25k range. It folds up and you can put it under your arm. It is a total game changer. Imagine 10 new bridges. Imagine 100,000 of these little bikes. You can all afford one. You would operate differently. The city would operate differently. The technology is already here. The public policy is the thing that needs to change, and the infrastructure provision, and what we're provoking in saying, let's look seriously about how we collaborate and get together to change the city. I love the answer one of the earlier people gave about one of Kate's questions about let's build the Brisbane that we want, the Brisbane that's right for this city, that's not necessarily right for another place. This is a unique place with a tremendous opportunity. Let's see if we can change the city. Thank you.